Good morning, everybody. Thank you for coming. My name is Randy Glaser. I have a Facebook page. It's Meadview, South Cove, water level, and lake info. It's right here behind me. If you haven't been on it, I urge you to go on it. It talks about things that are happening with the lake, anywhere from Colorado to Mexico, California, but mostly about South Cove and Lake Mead. I'm fortunate to be able to work with the Park Service. They were nice enough to keep me informed, to keep the public informed through the Facebook page and social media, YouTube, and things like that, on what's going on. This is a huge issue for the western states. It's looking like it's probably going to get worse before it gets better. And South Cove, unfortunately, is part of that issue. National Park Service, I want to thank them so much for coming out. It takes a long time to get out here. A lot of driving from where they are and getting up early, and took a lot to get here today. Excuse my voice, I'm losing my voice. But it took a lot to get everybody to get here. We tried to get this over the summer. It didn't work out. But it actually worked out better right now because we're seeing progress being done down at the South Cove that we didn't see over the summer. And as everybody knows, it looks very nice down there. I want you to keep in mind the magic number in your mind is 1,044 feet. That's where South Cove may or may not be affected. We're at 1,067 feet right now, give or take a few inches. And here are some future projections that were released just recently by the Bureau of Water Reclamation for the next 24 months, which the Park Service will reiterate and go over this again in depth, and you'll be able to ask questions after their presentation. Lake Mead always drops before it goes up. So it will continue to drop. It always does every year, and it'll continue to drop towards the end of the year. We're expecting it to drop another foot or two before we start seeing it go up, so don't panic too much. You're going to see the lake going down. You're going to see conditions changing, and then as we get into January of next year, you're probably going to see the lake rise back up. The projections for next year from January to late February, which would be the beginning of the year, we should be at around 1,070 feet. Now keep in mind these are just projections. They can change, and they have in the past, and they probably will again. So the beginning of the year, we're going to be going back up. In March of 2022, next year, they're expecting to see a decline, and that's when we're going to start seeing the lake dropping again like we did this year. These are just projections, and I could be a couple feet off either way. In July, when the 4th of July comes around, we're going to be down to 1,055 feet approximately. Now keep in mind today we're at 1,067 feet. So this July we're going to be lower than we are today, if projections hold true from the past. If we get some great big snows in Colorado, this is all going to go out the window and could change. In October of 2022, projections are about 1,053. The end of the year in 2022 are about 1,050. Going into the 2023 year, January, it's going to start going back up again like it usually does to around 1,055, but they're not expecting it to be a great increase. This is where the river system starts to run into issues because we count on that snowfall. So depending on what happens at the end of next year, going into 2023, will greatly affect the future of Lake Mead. Marinas in Lake Mead, not just South Cove, but everything that's happening on the Lake Mead water system. 2023 in March, the decline is expected again. It'll start dropping from 1,055 down to 1,050. April of 2023, 1,040. Now keep in mind, I just Remember that magic 1,044 number in your head? Or April to May of 2023, we will be below that number if projections show true at about 1,040 feet. June 1st of 2022, or 2023, excuse me, be about 1,030 feet. And that is 37 feet lower than we are today. In July, 1,025 feet. That's the end of the study from the Bureau of Water Reclamation at this point. These are just projections. But as you can see, what they're looking at, water or snowfall in Colorado, if things keep going the way they have been going in the drought that's been 22 years in the making, these are projections. So we're hoping for some good snowfall to come our way and to keep our river system operating and keep South Cove up and running. That being said, Justin Pattison is going from the Park Service. He is the Deputy Superintendent for the National Park Service. He has a group of people that he brought here today. I'd like to invite him up to speak, and he'll get into a little more depth on what I just went over and explain to you these projections and topography of South Cove, what's under the water and what's to come and what we should expect. So, Justin, if you'd like to come up.
Good morning, everybody. I want to start off by thanking the Chamber as well as the Meadview community for the opportunity for the Park Service to come here today and provide you guys with some information. So we'll be doing two different presentations today. David's actually going to handle the first presentation. He will be giving you an update on the hydrology both in Lake Powell as well as Lake Mead, what the current status is, what the projections look like in the next 24 months, as well as the next 5 years. After that presentation, we'll pause. We'll take questions at that point specific to the hydrology within the basin. And then I will jump into a presentation related to launch ramps at Lake Mead, and then more specifically what you all can expect at South Cove as far as launching in the future. After I give my presentation, we'll also do another round of questions and answers. Sound good? Great. Okay, so I'm going to hand it off for Dave to do an update on basin-wide hydrology.
All right, good morning, everybody. And again, thank you. I just want to echo Justin's comments with our appreciation for hosting us today, and hopefully we can answer some questions for all of you. Thank you to Randy for sort of giving a brief overview as we get started on this. I'm going to be going through a number of tables and numbers. The particular numbers, these are models. And I think it's important to understand a couple things before we get into it. One, there is no guarantee on all these numbers. I think what will be most important for all of you is to look at the trends rather than the specific numbers, because you're going to see that they continue to shift and have been shifting for a while as these models are developed and run. The other thing I want to explain right up front is maybe just a little bit, in case you have any questions, about the roles of the Park Service and the roles of the other federal agencies that are involved in Lake Mead. So the Park Service is responsible for managing the physical lands, the recreation area, and the resources within the boundaries of Lake Mead, but we do not control the water. We have certainly we work with our federal partners to provide input to that, but the Bureau of Reclamation is the decision maker on how much water Lake Mead gets. And to that point, I think it's also important to note that when you talk about the source of water for Lake Mead, for all practical purposes, the majority of that water, the vast majority of it, comes from Lake Powell. It does not come from the amount of water that we get from the Muddy, the Virgin River, and tributaries. It's not anywhere as significant as the amount of water that's released from Lake Powell. So, Audrey, if you can get us to the first slide, please. And I bring that up because I think it's important for all of us to think of Lake Mead and the water not as a standalone body of water, but as part of a larger system. that goes all the way from the source of water that comes from Wyoming and Colorado and Utah down, and the interconnectedness of the reservoirs up in the the upper basin and the water in the lower basin. Certainly Lake Havasu, Lake Mead, all of that is connected to the water that is ultimately found in Lake Powell. So the first set of numbers I want to kind of point out is to give you an idea of where we sit as a system, this water system here in the desert Southwest, what the percentage of water is. So at Lake Powell is currently only at 30% full of its total capacity. Lake Mead's at 34%, Mojave 88%, Havasu 92%, and the entire system, Havasu, Lake Mead, Lake Powell, the upper basin reservoirs, we are only at 39% of the total storage capacity within this basin. And that basin is what provides not only power through Lake Powell and the hydroelectric dams, but also water for agriculture, and drinking water, recreation for literally tens of millions of people in the desert Southwest. Next slide, please. So here are some of the projections that Bureau of Reclamation, these numbers come out monthly from the Bureau of Reclamation. The numbers I'm sharing with you were produced in late September, just about a month ago, not quite a month ago. We will continue to get new numbers. But if you look at Lake, as Randy said, Lake Mead is, in September was about 1,067 feet. By the end of October, we expect it to be about a foot lower than that at 1,066 feet. Mojave and Havasu, you can read there too. Everything south of the Hoover Dam tends to be a little bit more stable. There are some seasonal variations, as you all know, but the big changes occur in the larger reservoirs at Powell and Lake Mead. Next slide. All right. This is really the beginning of where the rubber meets the road in terms of determining what the future looks like, the short-term future for Lake Mead. This is the Colorado River Basin above Lake Powell, so all the smaller reservoirs, Flaming Gorge and other Navajo, that feed into Lake Powell. The black line that you can see there is the medium. That's the average over the last number of years, but that's the average that we go by. If you notice the blue line, however, that is last year up through March of 2021, which was with a peak of snow melt, water coming into the system. You can see that it is almost 25% lower than the median, and it is certainly lower than in years past. And the point of this is, again, when in a reservoir, a man-made system, there's only two variables: how much water is coming out and how much water is coming in. And in this case, we see consistently lower water coming into the system, which is then means that there's less water to be pushed down further south. The reasons for that can be debated, but I think what the scientists, and the Bureau of Reclamation works with scientists from NASA, from NOAA, from the Park Service, and a number of organizations, but more and more what we're seeing is that the reduction of water, you used to say, and you still hear it, another good snow melt will make the difference. If we get a couple good years of higher amounts of snowpack, we'll be okay. The problem is that one, we're not seeing the snowpacks historically that we've been seeing, but two, even when we do see, if you model it at higher amounts of moisture being put into the system in terms of snowpack, that water's not reaching the rivers and it's not reaching the reservoirs, because the average temperature continues to climb year after year, and so you're getting an increased amount of evaporation before that water even gets into the rivers, and the soil moisture is so low, the dryness of the soils is such that as that snow begins to melt, it's being absorbed right into the ground before it gets a chance to run off into the rivers. The result is less water coming into the river system. If you look at the next slide, please. So here, just for some comparison. If you look at August of this year observed, the inflow going into the upper basin was only 59% of average. That's the actual amount of water getting into those rivers that's ultimately going into Lake Powell and Lake Mead. At Flaming Gorge, between April and July, the amount of inflow, only 39%. Blue Mesa, 47%. Lake Powell, 26%. And Navajo, 51%. So, and I hear it quite frequently, as do my other NPS partners about the amount of water that's being taken out through agriculture and new development, and that is there is certainly a reality to that, but that's not what's driving what you're seeing at South Cove. What you're seeing at South Cove is a reduction of water coming in the beginning. And if I'm going too fast, if at any point you have any questions, we'll stop at the end, and I'll be happy to answer them, but feel free to ask me anything as we're going through this. Next, perfect. So this is the end of the water year is September 30th. It's sort of like a fiscal year. So the end of the water year projections for Lake Mead and Lake Powell, again, we're the same number, 1,067, but you see that we're only at about 35% of capacity in Lake Mead. Lake Powell sitting at about 30%. And next slide. End of the calendar year, this would take us through December, as Randy had indicated, that we're looking at the percentage coming down about 1% lower, 34% for Lake Mead, and 27% capacity at Lake Powell, taking us by the end of the calendar year, if these projections hold true, to about 1,066. So roughly the same through the end of the calendar year for this year. Next slide, please. This is a complicated slide, but there's one point that I want to try to make in this. Each one of these bands, you see the black vertical bar, that is where we're at now. So everything to the left of that is documented historical data. Everything to the right are the projections that have been released monthly over the last number of months. And what you'll see starting at the top is that as these model runs have been run, going back as far as July of 20, you see that you get a run in July, you get a run in August, and with each one of those successive model runs, we're dipping further and further south. And the takeaway in that is that the conditions are changing rapidly. The models generally, for the most part, it's fair to say, have been run on historical data, looking at the average snowpack, the average amount of water coming into the system over the last 20, 30 years. Next slide, please. All right. So again, that tall vertical bar to the left is where we're at today, and so everything to the left of that is historical data, and this is based on most probable, again, not the highest possible, not the lowest possible, but the sort of the median, and where the general assumption is that we will be at. So if we go to the end of 2021, as we said earlier, we're looking at about 1,066 feet, not too different than we're at today. And again, as Randy pointed out, we anticipate water climbing over the spring a little bit, probably getting to a peak of about 1,070 in March or so of next year. And then we begin dropping, as we have seen over the last few years. By the end of 2022, based on the most probable, we're looking at 1,050 feet in Lake Mead, which is 5 feet above where we get pretty critical at South Cove, or is it 1,045? Correct. So South Cove is still functional with the improvements we're making by the end of this calendar year based on this model. And then, of course, like we saw earlier, water will begin to climb, and then the forecast begins to drop again. I should also point out that with any model, the further out you get, the less accurate that model probably is. It's like a weather forecast. Your 2-day forecast is a lot more accurate than your 7-day forecast. So, keep that in mind, but generally the lines and the models are showing us that by the end of by September of 2023, Lake Mead has got a likelihood of being at about 1,035 feet, which is 10 feet lower than you would need water at South Cove to maintain a boat ramp and operations as they are today. Next slide, please. Now, that variability I spoke of, and I'm going to step over here, I may be out of the camera a little bit. This lines above, this light yellow above and below, represents the sort of, if you take a model, and I don't want to give you a lecture on statistics and probability, but this is the sort of the outliers, the 10% the odds of it being, the 10% that the model runs are going to be lower, and the 10% chances that that the water is higher. But this is that 10 to 90% chance, sort of the median, and you can still, even with that, see the significant amount of variability the further out you get. So on this model, there is, and what we're beginning to see is that by 2023, go to Lake Mead here. There's a possibility, although low, that you could even see the water at 900 feet. Nobody believes that's likely. That's in the 10% possibility. But the chances of it being between 10 and 90% show us somewhere between 1,000 feet and 1,075 feet. And you still have a lot of variability. The closer you get to the present day, the more you can see that this begins to shrink because there's more confidence in those model runs. But it does show, and I think the point of this is that we're learning as we're going here in terms of what's happening. And I think the takeaway for you folks is that this is kind of an unprecedented event. I don't need to tell you, anybody that lives out here, that. But this is not something that we have seen historically before at this level. And I think that's an important thing to note. So if you look at, thank you, Audrey. If you go to Lake Mead, and these are some model runs. These were done in June of 2021. They were corrected in August of 2021. But these were the chances of the water being in Lake Mead in 2025 being less than 1,025 feet. Not a very high probability. But as you start to go further out in years, 2024, 2025, 2026, at 1,025, the chances of us reaching those levels begins to increase to the point where in 2026, there's a 63% chance that we may only be at 1,025 feet. Doesn't mean it's going to happen for certain, but that's where the trend seems to be indicating. You don't see that. You see a 0% chance of that in 2022 because, again, the confidence is it would be nearly impossible for that to happen. It is impossible for it to happen this year, and you only see about a 25% chance of that in 2023. But even at 25%, that's a bigger number than I think anybody feels real comfortable with. And I think as you look at it, 25 to 44, and those numbers increasing just within the next 4 years, again, it indicates that there's a higher confidence that things are going to get worse before they get better. If you look at those numbers below 1,000 feet, the chances remain lower, but by 2026, there still is a 22% chance that Lake Mead could get down to 1,000 feet. And hopefully that won't happen. But I want to throw this information out. This information is public. You can get it off the Bureau of Reclamation website. But these are the numbers that we get monthly that help us make decisions about what, as Justin's going to talk about here, what can be done at South Cove and at all the different facilities within the lake to assure, to the best of our extent, that we can keep public access to the water as part of recreation. Any questions I can answer for anybody? Yes, sir.
We know our situation here at South Cove.
The question, if I got it right, is what do these impacts have on the other potential or current launch sites within Lake Mead? Echo Bay, Colville, Hemingway, and things like that. Thunder, I mean, it comes down to kind of two things. One is how much water is there and what the forecast is for how long that water is going to be there. But the second thing is the realities of the bathymetry under that water. I mean, there are places in Lake Mead that you may still have enough water, but it's the sort of the rise and run of the shore is so shallow that it nearly becomes impossible to be able to launch a boat in that place, or in places it drops off as a cliff. So even if the water isn't as much of an issue, you've got bathymetry topography underneath that water that makes certain places under certain water levels almost impossible to be utilized as a ramp. These water level projections are the same for all the places in the lake. The level of the water at South Cove is going to be the same level it is up at Echo Bay. But each one has to be judged independently in terms of what is possible there because of that topography below the surface, basically the land. Does the land allow itself? How far out can you extend? And that's different from place to place. But again, Justin will talk a little bit about that.
Okay. Thank you, David, for a general overview of the hydrology throughout the system. Now we'll drill down a little bit here and talk specific to Lake Mead, launch ramps, boater access, as well as specifically what to expect in South Cove over the next 18 to 24 months. And I'll try to get to answering some of your questions that you had. Next slide, please. So real quick, just a little overview of what we'll be talking about here over the next 15 minutes or so. I'll be looking to provide a operational status update for all of the launch ramps on Lake Mead. We'll then dive into kind of the history surrounding low water planning at South Cove. We'll then take a look at some of the bathymetry that we have at South Cove, and everybody should have got a handout that shows that bathymetry. We'll then talk about the operational viability of the current concrete ramp, cover a little bit on launching at South Cove, the improvements that Zane Johnson and his crew just completed out at South Cove Point, and then cover the near-term viability of launching at South Cove Point. And then if I haven't answered everybody's questions by the end of this, we'll have some time to answer your questions. As Dave stated during his presentation, if there is stuff as we go through this that's not exactly clear, please stop me and I'll try to answer those questions as we work through this. Next slide, please. All right. So starting with an operational status update of launch ramps park-wide. Up in the left side of the slide is a picture of Colville Bay. Colville Bay currently remains open on one lane of pipe mat. To contrast that, over on the Arizona side, the Temple Bar launch ramp was indefinitely closed in July of 2021. Next slide, please. Over at Hemingway Harbor, as well as at Echo Bay, both of those launch ramps remain open. However, launching is on one lane of pipe mat. Next slide, please. And a little closer to home and more important for the Meadview community is the South Cove launch ramp. So the concrete ramp was closed indefinitely on June of 2021 due to low water levels. However, since that time, about a half mile south, launching has been available on what's been called South Cove Point. I believe Randy posted this information on his Facebook page, but in September 24th of this year, we did provide a press release just as a heads up to visitors on what to expect in 2022 in regards to lake access. This press release included the current 24-month projections, which are shown here for Lake Mead, and had a breakdown of what visitors can expect in 2022 at each of the launch ramp locations. So starting with Boulder Harbor, Boulder Harbor will remain closed through 2022 given current projections. Hemingway Harbor, as well as Echo Bay, will continue to operate on one lane of pipe mat. Both Echo Bay and Hemingway Harbor will undergo what we're calling a phase one extension of the concrete ramps here over the next several months. However, given current projections, by the time we get to prime boating operating season next year, we anticipate those extensions will quickly become out of the water, and those two sites will have launching available on one lane of pipe mat. Temple Bar, Temple Bar will remain closed at least through 2022. And the park is evaluating potentially relocating that. But through 2022, there will not be launching available at Temple Bar. At Colville Bay, that launch ramp will close at an elevation of roughly 1062. Based off of current projections, that's anticipated to occur next May. So roughly May of next year, we anticipate having to close the Colville Bay launch ramp, and that will not reopen until the launch ramp is potentially relocated at a later date, depending on funding availability. Specific to South Cove, we anticipate the concrete launch ramp to remain closed next year. However, launching will continue to be available at South Cove Point. Next slide, please. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the history of South Cove as it relates to low water planning. So the Park Service has been considering launch ramp needs due to the lowering lake levels on Lake Mead since approximately 2005. In 2005, the Park Service did an environmental assessment down to a lake level of 1050. And specific to South Cove, in that 2005 environmental analysis, the Park Service told the Meadview community as well as others in the public that we would extend the existing launch ramp at South Cove down to a lake elevation of 1,100 feet. After such time, we would relocate the launch ramp and install a new concrete launch ramp from approximately 1,100 feet down to an elevation of 1050. What actually ended up happening is the current location was viable for a launch ramp extension down to 1070 instead of 1,100 feet. So we were able to extend the existing concrete launch ramp at South Cove an additional 30 vertical feet than initially planned. In 2018, the Park Service realized that there was a very high likelihood that the lake would go below an elevation of 1050, and realizing that there was an updated environmental assessment to cover low water needs from an elevation of 1050 down to an elevation of 950 at Lake Mead. We chose 950 because 950 is what's called dead pool on Lake Mead. So that is the elevation point where Hoover Dam actually can no longer produce electricity. So we did a draft environmental analysis. We sent that out in 2018, and we said, hey, South Cove, we're actually just gonna not extend your ramp anymore. It's been constructed down to 1070, but below this elevation, once the water drops, we're not going to develop any more launch ramps. There was significant concern from the public in regards to what the Park Service came out and said. In 2018, we received 27 comments in regards to our proposal at South Cove, and all of those expressed significant concerns with the Park Service's plan not to maintain boat access below an elevation of 1070. The Park Service in December of 2018 held a public meeting. I believe that was in Kingman, and they actually said, no, wait, actually we we actually made a mistake. We've actually had plans since 2005 to extend the launch ramp down to 1050. Our bad, we made a mistake. We got you guys covered. I believe there was even a comment that the Park Service had $500,000 for those improvement needs below 1070. So in March of 2019, the park finalized their environmental assessment for low water plans down to an elevation of 950. And for South Cove, basically that said below 1050, we would still allow launching to occur at the end of an authorized park road. Next slide, please. So this bathymetry overview, you all have this handout. This shows a couple things. One is, and we'll see this on the next slide, to the north where the existing launch ramp is, you can see some pink colors there. That's some older bathymetry that we have in that area that we'll look at on the next slide. And then to the south of the existing launch ramp, you can see some color coding, and that starts with the South Cove point where launching currently is occurring, and then we have acquired bathymetry data to the south of that. The color bands, aside from the red band, each color band that you see is a 5-foot elevational change. And once you kind of look at these, if you notice the green, and I apologize, the colors differences between the two green colors didn't turn out very well, but those green colors, you can see those start to get closer and closer. They're not as wide, which indicates that it's steeper topography. So in general, within the South Cove area, below an elevation of roughly 1040, the topography steepens significantly, and it drops down into the historic Colorado River floodplain. And that's a lot easier to see with the 3D image that's also shown on this slide. Where the boat is here is actually South Cove Point, and then looking back upriver, but you can see again how the topography drops off steeply down into the historic floodplain. Next slide, please. All right, so this is the bathymetry within the area of the existing concrete ramp. And you can see, again, the color change between the green and the yellow. Those changes are very close together. Again, that indicates a steepness or a significant change in elevation over a short interval. Again, that's a little easier to see in the 3D image to the right. But specific to this concrete launch ramp, the reason it's closed is because roughly below an elevation of 1072, the slopes steepen significantly, and they're in excess of roughly 50%, again, as that topography drops off and goes down to the historic floodplain. Next slide, please. All right. Let's take a closer look at the bathymetry at South Cove Point. Through the Park Service's analysis, this is the only area within South Cove that has topography that is conducive for continued launching below roughly an elevation of 1070. Again, the red is roughly a 10-foot change, and then all of the other colors are a 5-foot vertical elevation change. And you can see how this point starts out as a very kind of just broad ridge. And then the further that the point goes out, it actually starts to narrow into more of a knife ridge. So we've got launching currently available at South Cove Point, but some of you may be asking, well, wait a minute, like the park said down to 1050 they were going to provide a concrete ramp for launching. Where's that, concrete ramp from 1070 to 1050 in South Cove Point? And the answer to that is shown on this graph here. So this graph is from the October 24-month study. We could have installed a concrete ramp at South Cove that would have taken roughly 2 phases and costed an estimated $1.2 million. You can see the first dotted line here indicates when the first phase of an extension for a concrete launch ramp would have been needed. And then you can see when the second phase would be needed shortly after, and I believe that's in the end of May of 2022. So by the time we actually constructed that ramp in May of 2022, it would have only been available for 4 to 5 months before we hit the projected elevation where that launch ramp would have had to close, and that's shown by the red dashed line here. So given the $1.2 million cost and it only being used for roughly 4 to 5 months, it just didn't make financial sense for the Park Service to spend $1.2 million for that. So because of that, launching at South Cove will continue to just be authorized on the natural surface as it's currently being done. Next slide, please. Okay. So let's talk about South Cove Point and some of the improvements that we have been able to recently complete. These are some pictures. Thank you, Zane, that we took this week. The first picture is looking down towards the primitive launch ramp, and it shows an improved turnaround area. The photo on the right shows the new trash receptacles and restrooms that were installed just above the turnaround area. Zane and his staff have also formalized the parking area and installed additional directional signage in the area. Over the next couple weeks, the courtesy dock that's at the existing concrete ramp will be repositioned and repaired, but it will stay in the existing location. We chose not to move the courtesy dock over to the point due to in that location it would be exposed to the elements, and so we thought it was better to just leave it in the current location where it was protected mainly from the wind. Next slide, please. This is just some additional pictures of the improvements that have been done over the last several weeks. I will mention too, there will also be ongoing maintenance in the form of grading at this spot as well as needed. Next slide, please. So let's look again at South Cove Point and talk about the near-term viability. So we discussed earlier that this point eventually, the further you go down, starts to form a knife ridge. And this knife ridge narrows as we go down, and right in this area here, which is an elevation between 1048 and 1043 feet, that is only about 15 feet wide at that point. So below those elevations, the topography is going to become too steep, and that ridge is not going to be wide enough to actually back a vehicle down and launch a boat at that point. So Randy said 1044. I'm a little bit more of an optimist. So the Park Service was predicting closer to around 1042 that the topography at South Cove Point will prevent any further launching. And at this point, there is no other viable topography in the area that we've identified for launching. Next slide, please. So if we go with the assumption of 1042 or 1044-ish, that South Cove Point will no longer be viable, and we overlay that assumption with the current Bureau of Reclamation's 24-month projections, we would conclude that roughly sometime in the end of July, end of August in 2023, based off of current projections, that South Cove Point would no longer be viable for launching and would close at that point. Next slide, please. So with that, I've covered a lot of information. I know you all have some questions likely. Again, thanks for the opportunity to come out here and share some of this information with you. As Dave indicated, the unfortunate reality is the trend is that the lake's going to continue to go down, and I realize that will impact this area not only from a lake access standpoint, but also potentially an impact on the economy here. So with that, here's some areas where you can find additional information, and I am more than happy to answer any questions that you may have at this point.
My question is just a quick one. You said that they're going to keep...
The question was, to summarize, would the Park Service plan to utilize a pipe mat at South Cove Point? And the answer to that is yes, we'll look at utilizing a pipe mat at South Cove Point if needed. Can we go back to the bathymetry? So South Cove Point is essentially on the top of a ridge, and so over time, all of the kind of more fine-grained material has eroded off of that ridge, and so right now the native material there is fairly granular, and so vehicles haven't had an issue with backing their trailers in and launching them. However, as we go down in elevation, that we may run into areas where there's been sediment deposited over time, especially since how we're so close to the river, and we have all that sediment that's coming down into South Cove and settling out. So there's a possibility as we go down in elevation that we may run into more sediment, at which point then yes, we would look to install a pipe mat. Sorry, Zane. Yes, ma'am.
It regards in Temple.
Yeah, so the question is specific to Temple Bar and what's going to happen to the marina. Yeah, and so as I covered earlier, right now, at least through 2022, there will not be a launch ramp. However, currently the marina remains open. And yeah, you're correct. There's kind of a dirt parking area there that they're utilizing and slowly extending their walkway and moving the marina out as the water goes down.
So are they still launching there then in the dirt?
No, there's no launching currently going on at Temple Bar. So folks that don't have a slip in a marina, typically what they've been doing is they'll launch at like Hemingway Harbor, for example, drive their boat over to Temple Bar and then, utilize a slip or somewhere there to tie onto the dock during their visit.
So is the fuel station still open there then?
The question is the fuel station open? Yes, the fuel station is currently still open. Yes, sir.
How is this going to affect the generating power at the dam?
So the question is, how is this going to affect the power generation of the dam? Bureau of Rec would be able to answer more specifically the percent decrease, but in general, the efficiency of power production will go down as the lake elevation continues to decrease. And if the lake were to ever get to an elevation of 950, the dam would stop producing power at that point. Yeah, so the question is, what's the plan for the other launch ramps? And specific to Colville Bay, there is a point identified that there could be a road built and a launch ramp installed there. There's also at Temple Bar a location identified where one could construct a road and install a new ramp. At Hemingway Harbor, the concrete launch ramp could continue to be installed in its current location down to an elevation of roughly 1,000 feet, at which point then that would need to be relocated. And at Echo Bay, that launch ramp will actually need to be moved below an elevation of 1050, just kind of further out on the point that it's currently constructed. So there are plans from a topographic standpoint to extend or relocate facilities depending on what location you're at. However, the challenge with that is overlaying that with fiscal realities and what the Park Service can actually afford from a facility investment standpoint. So there's a high likelihood that the Park Service will need to prioritize their facility investments over the next 3 to 5 years, depending on if these projections continue to hold true.
Launch access?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question is, does the Park Service see anywhere else within the South Cove area that we could have a alternative launch site below roughly 1042? And the short answer to that is no, but I'll explain that a little bit more. Can we go back a couple slides, please, Audrey? Keep going. So the Park Service this summer did an extensive bathymetry survey, starting with South Cove Point and moving roughly an additional half mile, 3/4 of a mile to the south to look for topography that would be conducive to launching below 1040. And the challenge again, and it shows up a little bit better here than it does on your printouts, but the park just has not found any conducive topography in the immediate area. We're coming right out of the Grand Canyon, and so it's not a huge surprise that certainly as the water continues to go down, we're seeing more canyon-like topography. Just add, specific to the point itself, like I said, the further we go out on that point as the water drops, the more narrow it becomes. So the ability for us to kind of move that turnaround point further down is going to be constrained by the topography there. So as the water goes down, unfortunately, folks are going to have to back their trailers up, further to access the water. And then I will also just caution folks as the water does continue to go down, as that ridge narrows, there's going to be drop-offs on either side. So folks are going to have to be very vigilant and cautious as they launch their boats, especially as we start to approach that 1044, 1042 range. Is there any other questions? Yes, ma'am.
Did the loader live?
The loader did make it to Catworks, and we did have an assessment done on it, and it'll be sold for scrap at some point. I was hoping to make it through the entire meeting without that coming up, but thank you for bringing it up.